Doesn't matter what your check average is. You can be $500 check average. 600 to 700 bottles of wine is plenty of inventory for anybody, because there's a number of factors here. Number one, over the past 5 years, the wine industry delivery program has become a science, meaning that you can get deliveries every day. So let the wine distributor pay for the warehousing, because here's what a lot of owners miss. If you have 1,000 square feet of wine storage and your rent is $80 a square foot, that's a lot of money per month that you're paying square footage for to store wine.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Mastering Restaurant Revenue, turning restaurant dreams into significant profits. We are your hosts, Bruce Russo, 550 plus restaurant concepts designed and built, and a tower of national and regional awards. He's the GOAT of restaurant design and build for money-making operations. And I'm Diane Armitage, 30 years leading a global marketing agency. I help restaurants design not just a space, but a profit machine. And in fact, Bruce is all about profit machines too, because he has introduced the concept of revenue pods in restaurants, because the number one goal for any restaurant from design forward is what, Bruce?
To make money.
Make money.
Revenue,
multiple streams of revenue. Okay,
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about another stream of revenue today in the wine program you build into your restaurant. Bruce, you've been involved in many of these wine programs.
Oh, yeah.
From the start.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so let's start with the start. So, well, let's actually do a little background on this. Okay, what restaurant concepts have you worked with that actually have established wine programs? Does it go all the way down to like expedited counter service? How does it normally work?
Typically,
Okay.
five distinct brands, and that's it. And that's the inventory. Typically sold by the glass. Okay, the other side of the spectrum is the 120 up check average, and the bottle of wines could start at $80 and go to $400 or even more.
Correct. Yeah, or more. Yeah.
And so when we're designing that upper check average, the big question is, how much inventory do you want to carry? Because I can tell you that, I mean, I've done a restaurant with 3,000 bottles of inventory, which
how
to
big
me
was that
is
restaurant?
10,000 feet.
Okay.
But, you know, the wine storage was about 1,200 square feet.
That's a lot.
Okay, that's a
square
lot
footage.
of wine. So
Yeah.
you have to look at what do you sell every day. Now, this was quite some time ago, probably 12 years ago when we designed that restaurant. Now, I strongly encourage, doesn't matter what your check average is, you can be $500 check average. 600 to 700 bottles of wine is plenty of inventory for anybody, because there's a number of factors here. Number one, over the past 5 years, the wine industry delivery program has become a science, meaning that you can get deliveries every day. So let the wine distributor pay for the warehousing, because here's what a lot of owners miss. If you have 1,000 square feet of wine storage and your rent is $80 a square foot, that's a lot of money per month that you're paying square footage for to store wine.
Exactly.
So that program has to be profitable enough. You know, it's anything in any kind of restaurant. You don't ever want that rent to exceed 6 to 8% of your gross. So you go to your gross of what you're selling per month and then look at the rent. You know, sometimes they could be in the hole. So don't forget to calculate the cost of the square footage of storage, because it's overhead.
Correct.
Although you're
and
paying
it's
it as
controlled
rent.
overhead.
Okay, but it's a pot of revenue. That's why these pods of revenue, that's why Bruce come up with these, because that's a pot of revenue. As I tell you, works totally different than the bar. That
Yes.
revenue comes totally different than the food or the appetizer. You see, because there's a cost involved. That cost involved to store the wine is probably a lot more than it is if you break down meal by meal of what the square foot of the kitchen costs. You see what I'm saying? So the revenue pod that the kitchen produces for is one segment. The dining room, okay, you don't calculate that. That's just a general overhead. But the dining room is part of the wine sales. But you can't put that overhead square footage into the wine sales. But you surely can put it into the overhead of the wine storage.
Okay.
That
Say
makes
that
sense?
again. Yeah, it makes sense, but say it again so they catch it.
Well, you're not going to put the cost of the square footage of the dining room into your wine program. But you do need to consider the cost of the square footage of your wine storage, because that's a direct expense to your wine storage. So that's
Absolutely.
a direct expense that goes against your wine storage is an asset, okay? But it's basically a non-performing asset until somebody in the dining room orders it. Does that make sense?
So how
Because
much do you split up? Go ahead.
Because you're storing the wine. So it's doing nothing there but being stored. So it's an asset because it's inventory that you bought for X and you're selling for 3X.
Gotcha.
Okay,
Correct.
but it's not an automatic 3X.
Correct.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
There has to be something has to happen in order for that 3X to engage. Something has to be engaged to make that 3X sale happen. And that's where the dining room comes in. So the dining room clientele is an asset that's basically feeding a liability, because the storage of the wine basically it's an asset, but there's a liability because it costs you money to store that.
And when
So
you are designing a restaurant for storage, how much of the storage is in the back and how much of the storage is in display in the front of house?
Well, I like to keep about half and half, you know, and I like to, you know, like an 8x8 room with one door in it that swings out. You know, you can get a lot of cases of wine in there. You know, you can only go to 5 or 6 feet because, you know, you don't want anybody lifting cases of wine over their head. And if you do, that's a 2-man process to pull it down from an 8-foot ceiling height. So, you know, 5 foot, you know, and it's the box. I just figured the box is at 20 inches square. So, you know, if you can get 100 cases of wine or 150 cases of wine in storage, that's a lot of wine to display.
Now, do you typically just put in shelving for boxes or do you put in racks for actual bottles in the back storage?
No, I leave it. What I do is put like a pallet on the floor and I let them inventory it in the case.
Okay.
If the case needs to be broken, then it needs to go to display.
Okay.
There's no reason to have half cases sitting in storage.
Correct. Okay.
It's too hard to inventory that way.
And when you are working in front of house, I know you probably have put wine displays in every possible location, but do you have a favorite place where you prefer to have wine displays on display?
Right now, my favorite, the most functional wine display, and I use it quite often in my design, is the glass wall between the private dining room and the main dining room.
Okay.
And sometimes we do it, majority of the time we do it sliding doors. So the door doesn't open into the traffic pattern because typically that's an egress path. So the sliding doors work out the best.
Sliding doors
Sliding doors. So we put wine racks, 3 bottles, and they lay sideways, label forward. So the client, when they come in or however they want to do it, they can browse the labels in that wine wall. And on the other side, the front wall is sliding glass doors. The back of the wall is a glass wall that typically shows into the private dining room. And the camouflage that you get from all the bottles of wine into the private dining room, it's a nice screen.
Yeah, that is a nice screen.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Now, you were telling me about a client that you designed the restaurant for, and you designed 2 different tiers of wine programs and display.
Yes. Yes.
So can you explain how you did that as well? Because when you explained it to him, he didn't even understand what you were talking about.
No.
Okay.
No, so I just recently designed a restaurant, and the customer, when we were going through what he was envisioning of his concept, he wanted an upper section for fine dining to where you can sit and watch the chef cook your meal. And that was like about 1,200 square feet, and it was in the center of the restaurant. The rest of the
and that
entire
check average
restaurant
would be what?
What's that?
That check average would be what?
Probably $300.
Okay.
Probably $300. But the rest of the restaurant was a little bit more casual, probably $60 to $80 check average.
Okay.
So we have these 2 tiers. So what I did was I put a display wall, but it was a solid wall behind. And it was only 10 foot long. And I put that behind the chef's kitchen to where when people were it was a U-shaped counter, and all the cooking equipment was in the middle. But so when the client sat at the radius, they can see through the sliding glass doors of all the wine on display. I made that upper tier a $200 a bottle and up classification.
Okay.
To
Makes
go
sense.
with the $300 check average.
Right.
Like I told the guy, I said, it doesn't make sense to display a $300 bottle of wine in a $60 check average arena.
Very well put.
I put wine display around the bar in the 60 to 80 check average. And that was probably a $60 to $80 bottle of wine inventory that would be displayed.
Now, when you're doing displays in these in the front of house, how do you keep the wine cool?
I typically put a unit on the roof just for the wine.
Okay, so let's explain that a little bit more.
Or I used a
Can you spool that?
Well, a ducted mini split is what I typically use.
Okay.
A mini split is far better, and in my opinion, in my experience, a mini split ducted system is more reliable than a wine cooler system. I haven't had a whole lot of luck with those, so that's why I went to mini splits, and they're made, and they're energy efficient, and they do the job.
When you're doing the mini splits, you can designate temperatures for the different regions.
Well, each mini split you would put a separate. We put a separate for the whites and a separate for the red.
Okay.
So in the display wall, I put a glass panel in between the red and white section.
Okay.
And so there's one mini split for the white section and one mini split for the red.
That's cool. So why did you choose that over wine coolers? What was kind of the fallout detriment with the wine coolers?
Well, what we found is that, there's every sommelier has a different opinion of what the wine should be chilled at. And, so we surveyed 10 of them. They all said, well, 65 is perfect. We like 65. I had 10 tell me we like 65 for the reds. And 55 to 60, preferably 60 on the whites. Because if you chill the whites too much, something happens to the sugar and you lose flavor. So, I've seen people put ice in a glass of white, but that's all personal.
Sometimes
preference.
you just have a day like that, and you've got to have it. You've got to have your wine fast.
Yes,
and cool.
No, I agree. That's the table chill version.
But, okay, so So when you were working with wine coolers, it wasn't consistent?
I don't want to bad rap the wine cooler business because there's plenty of residential people that have wine coolers in their house. But
Right.
from a commercial standpoint of view, I just never had success with them lasting more than 18 months or 2 years.
Oh, I see.
They've always been a warranty problem for me. And,
Okay.
there always seems to be an excuse. I mean, you have a professional HVAC contractor that installs it, and then the manufacturer come out, well, he probably should have done this, this, and this. Okay, can you show me that in your profile? Oh, it's not in there, but that's what we recommend.
Right. Okay.
Well, if I just spent $11,000 on a wine cooling unit, I think that's information that I should have had.
Well, and I would think that with your mini split system, and I would think that it would be much less expensive if you actually had to replace one of the splits. It would be much less expensive and faster to do than to replace an entire wine cooler.
There you go. So now you're checking the boxes on the problems I've had.
Okay.
So the warranty guy says, well, you should have done this, this, and this. I take a mechanical engineer out that he's been my mechanical engineer for 29 years.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I'm not seeing that. Then I get the HVAC contractor and the engineer talking. It's like, what we did on the install is exactly what needed to happen.
Right.
So there always seemed to be some kind of excuse why they couldn't warrant. I mean, it goes along the same thing with the tankless water heaters. We haven't had a whole lot of success with those either. They were great when they came out.
Maybe they're coming along.
Well, but when they came out, they were great because you saved the square footage.
Right.
Okay, and then when the city started seeing how they function, oh, that's great, but now you got to put a storage tank in.
Oh.
Well, if I got to put a tankless water heater and then put a storage tank in, I mean,
I'm not saving any space.
Why not just combine them both like we used to and go back to the old way?
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, so on the wine program, interesting on the design and build out, and you said about 600 to 700 bottles in a restaurant tops.
Yeah, in a 10,000 square foot restaurant, that's plenty of inventory because at the money you have invested in that, you got somebody managing it. So
True.
That manager, whoever's managing the wine program, has a relationship with his vendors to where they can deliver every day.
Absolutely.
I see it. I mean, the wine reps, if it's 2 cases for the day, they bring it in their car.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
and they love visiting restaurants. Those wine reps love visiting the restaurant.
Absolutely. So,
and they always bring a new thing to try.
Well, and the only time you ever see a truckload of wine show up is in pre-opening.
Yeah, correct. And like you said, I mean, I was telling you about the French chef that I worked with in Vegas with the Michelin restaurants, and he loved all these vintage wines, and he would go find them in the attics and the caves of France, and he'd bring back all these amazing rare wines. But because he was saving on storage, like you said, he would store most of that off-site in a much less expensive, wine cellar, so to speak.
Okay. Yes.
Climate controlled. And then he would only have a few hundred bottles in the restaurant because it's space. It's revenue. So,
that's what I'm saying. You need all that goes into the design. So, does 10 seats in the dining room make more money in 3 turns than the wine program? I would say probably yes. 75% of the time.
Right. Agreed. Yeah. And, I love how restaurants will feature wines. They'll pull great wines from their, their own stock and have wine dinners and do these kinds of big pairings with these wine dinner kind of things so that they can get people to understand what kind of stock that they have in the restaurant. Correct. And I think that's a great way to work through the stock and figure out how to, create a different revenue pod with special dinners, that kind of a thing, so that you're letting your clientele know about what's going on and you're turning your wine at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the reps will come to you. I mean, you know this. You know enough owners. They'll say, "Hey, we got an overstock of this, and this. So this month we're offering at $3 less a bottle." Majority of the times, the upscale restaurants will buy into that package, and then they create a menu for that wine dinner.
Correct.
To sell that inventory. So that's how your relationship bonding goes a long way with your wine rep.
Very true.
It increases his sale for the month. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I got to say it's one part of the business that there's still a lot of loyalty there.
Oh, that's good to hear. No, I agree with you. With you. And I've seen wine reps stay in the program for decades.
Yes.
And they know their wines.
Yes. And a lot of restaurateurs, once they get one that's good and does their job and helps make profit, they don't ever get rid of them.
Yeah. And they take them with them everywhere.
Correct.
So, yeah, agreed.
I mean,
that's great information.
It's nothing for me to see. There's a couple of wine reps that I probably see 10 times a year when we're building restaurants. And they're this restaurateur and that, so they're in the program as we're building them. They're starting to show up pre-opening and all that. So, it's a relationship business for sure.
Right. Agreed. Well, I think that this was great information. Is there anything else you want to add about wine programs? Because we've talked for quite a few minutes on this, and it's a great...
Well, and I think every restaurant should have some type of wine program. Just be smart about what you offer. And wine sitting on a shelf looking pretty doesn't make you any profit.
Agreed.
So if your check average isn't there to sell the wine that you need to sell, rethink your program, because maybe you minimize your wine program and up the flavors of alcohol that you're carrying. Something, you see what I'm saying? Something needs maybe you need to have 10 different kinds of vodka instead of 2. Or maybe you need to have 20 different kinds of whiskey instead of 4. You see what I'm saying? So,
right. A lot of it depends on the concept that you build out. A lot of it depends on what you've got going on with the menu and, that kind of a thing. I know a great whiskey house in Portland, Oregon, and it's got hundreds of whiskeys in it.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
I've seen them too. And it's amazing how many people know the different whiskeys.
Yes. I would agree with that. It's amazing. And, it's interesting, too, because a lot of people are saying, a lot of restaurant owners that I know are saying that they're selling less wine now, especially to the younger generations, because the younger generations aren't into wine.
No.
Like us old people. Right. And so they're having to shift a lot of their beverage program accordingly. It's cocktails. And that's what I was saying.
That's why I was saying earlier, you really need to know your market. Not every restaurant needs to have a wine program. It depends on your clientele. And, you can figure that curve out in your first 6 months of business.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Or, so you don't want to overbuy on the front end.
Correct. Or, check your concepts. Check 5 concepts in the neighborhood. And just sit in their bar for an hour and see what sells.
Very good point. So, yeah. Well, I love it. Anything else you want to add?
That's really about it. I mean, it's a revenue pod.
It's a great revenue pod if you know how to manage it and if you know how to sell it in the front of the house. But we'll talk about that in another episode.
Yes.
It's awesome.
Yes.
All right, my friends. Well, that's it for me and Bruce today, talking about wine programs as a revenue pod. And we're happy to have you here. Please like and subscribe and share all this news with your friends, your peers, your restaurant operators, your buddies. And thank you for being a part of the Mastering Restaurant Revenue world. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Thanks.
Thank you for joining Bruce and Diane on this journey of mastering restaurant revenue. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps them deliver even more of what you want to hear. Until next time, keep refining your approach, stay passionate about your craft, and here's to your restaurant's continued success.